Hey, Internet. After years of consuming AI news and updates and all these things, I was overwhelmed and I figured out a way to actually cut that down by 80% while still staying informed, actually more informed than ever. And it wasn't some sort of overnight hack, 5 steps to success, whatever. It was just years and years of understanding which sources have high signal versus noise and which matter for the things that I'm optimizing for, which is usefulness of AI. In this video, I'm going to share my AI information diet and also the tactics I use to consume that information in a timely and an effective way. Because honestly, consuming everything is impossible. But even worse, it's not useful. So with that being said, Internet, let's get into it and I'll show you my AI information diet and also my tactics. Alrighty, so as always, we have a beautiful image given to us from OpenAI. And this is actually an inspiration from another painting, that's a real painting, not from AI, called The Listener. So you can see the chaos happening around the listener. All these people are rushing to understand what's happening in the news and all the things that are happening with AI. And this person is just calmly sitting there, focusing on the few things that actually matter. All right, so let's dive into both my sources and how I perceive the consumption of information, period. Not just AI, but all information. So when I think about information, I think most information out there in the world associated to all topics is mostly noise. And this noise, as you can see, is everywhere. Now, different people, when they consume information, they consume it for different purposes. So it could be for entertainment, it could be for education, it could be for utilitarian purposes, it could be for a variety of other reasons. And it's important for you to know why you're consuming information. So if it's for entertainment purposes, that's great. You can optimize for that. If it's for educational purposes and curiosity purposes, you can optimize for that. So I think first understanding why you're consuming information is key to understanding where the signal actually sits. So for me, when I consume most information, especially in AI, I'm focused on utility. I want to know what's practical that I can apply to my stuff today, but also what's novel and actually stands out amongst all the things that are being discussed and can be meaningfully used either today or in the near future. And that's what I'm optimizing for. And that's what I seek when I look for a signal here. So you can see the signal isn't just here, but there's little bits of items around the signal as well that actually matter. So it's being able to understand where in the sea of noise where you should focus your attention so you don't have to necessarily worry about everything else. That's the premise, and that's kind of how I see things. And that's the mental framework I use when consuming information. So with that being said, there's two forms of consumption. One is audio, the other one is reading. And two forms of reading, which is proper reading and then skimming. So we'll start with audio. So with audio, I have here podcasts and YouTube. I mostly listen to it in audio, hence the reason I've called this audio and not both audio and video. Most of the stuff I consume is in audio format. I only watch video if it's absolutely necessary, when I need to see if somebody's doing something either with mathematics or technically. So on the podcast side, I've given you some of the resources that I feel are some of the best when it comes to high signal for AI. So number one is probably one of my favorites is Latent Space. And this kind of shows my bias because with the Latent Space podcast, they heavily focus on research that's being applied today. So applied research, not just research for research sake, and then building. So the premise of this podcast is to focus on AI engineers. Those that are building with AI and building inside of AI. So building products that have AI in it and also applying it. So this is a really high quality podcast. Next one is no priors. So this gives you insight into what's happening into the startup market and also products that are being launched by different startups. So it's kind of a good way to keep up what's going on without having to consume a bunch of information associated to this. So this is kind of my way of outsourcing the distillation of information. And that's actually another thing I probably should call it here. A way that I think about this stuff is all these individuals I'm following and consuming, they're doing a lot of the consumption for me. So I'm outsourcing the effort of consuming, especially latent space. So there's this guy named Swix. You can follow him on X if you want or other places. And I don't know what it is, but he's hooked into the matrix in the sense that he's in Silicon Valley and he knows like everybody and everything around AI. And he just for some reason can see all the information everywhere at all at once. And it's amazing. So I basically outsource it to him and he distills down what actually matters. And not just him, but other people. And that's a premise here is that you should find people you admire and also their perspective, ensuring that they're not just regurgitating stuff, but they're regurgitating it in a way that gives it a novel spin and or a unique insight that levels it up than just a repeating of a news article. All right. So we've talked about new priors. Next is Dwarkesh Patel. So this podcast isn't just about AI. So he talks about, I think, like politics and philosophy and economics and all that stuff. But when he does have people on about AI, he does an amazing job at interviewing them. And he oftentimes gets people to answer questions that often aren't answered elsewhere. So this is why I really appreciate his podcast. And he has a few deep dive interviews on AI. So he's interviewed people from Anthropic, he's interviewed people from OpenAI, Google, etc. So I recommend watching his For Those Deep Dive podcasts if you're interested in that. And next is YouTube. This first one here is AI Explained. And this individual, he does a good job at talking about research and models, and not just talking about those, because a lot of people talk about new research and models, but he talks about it from the perspective where you can see that he both knows his stuff, like he has experience in the space, but also he methodically researches things prior to making a video. Because oftentimes you see people talk about research and new models, and they're literally just reading you the blog post that the company have posted. So you can go off and read that yourself instead of having somebody read it to you. Another one is oftentimes they just restate an article or say, oh, this is going to change the game. Like this is the biggest thing ever. And it almost sounds like it's AI generated, even though it's a person doing it. This individual actually gives it thought and helps you discern the difference between this model and all the other models in the past and why it's different and actually if it's different or not, and also the downfalls to it. So highly recommend him for keeping up with new research and models. Next is AI Jason. So he really focuses on vibe coding. So if this isn't your bag, you don't have to worry about it. But if vibe coding is your interest, I think that he does a good job at pulling out net new things that I've not seen elsewhere. So he's a good one for vibe coding. AI engineer. So these two here not reoccurring. So everything I've talked so far, they tend to put out stuff on a weekly or biweekly basis. But these two here are summits. So, and this, yeah, real quick. So these are, I perceive these as summits. I don't follow these all the time. Reason being is that this one, they only publish videos when their summit happens, but a lot of the videos and the talks are very good. And its reason being is that they're pulling in the best research labs as well as some of the top startups in AI on utilizing AI at the cutting edge. And they're using it in production. So they're using it with consumers and their internal companies, etc. So they're giving you insight as to how these AI models and research variants are being utilized today. So I think that's really important to see when you're kind of at the cutting edge, seeing how people are applying it today. And then Sequoia, they've recently just published a conference. So this was published only a few days ago, and it was probably one of the better conference series that I've seen so far when it comes to talks and high signal to noise ratio. So I wouldn't follow Sequoia for their podcast and everything else. I've listened to a few. I'm not super interested, but this specific conference was a high quality one that I'd recommend listening to based off of the signal to noise ratio when it comes to AI. All right, so that is our audio journey. So now let's look at reading. So for reading, what I'll do is I'll skim most of the stuff here, and I'll only read things thoroughly when I absolutely think that it's necessary and it's useful. One thing that I'll skim, and skim is kind of like not necessarily true. So I read one part of this newsletter, and the rest I skip. So in the AI the newsletter, actually just let me show you what it looks like. So let's go to an example here. So when you look at this, you'll see, so from this line break here and up, this is the exec summary. So, and the exec summary for this specific newsletter is the one thing that this aggregator feels is the most interesting thing for the day, because this is a daily newsletter. So I don't read all of them. I try to read most of them, but I only read the executive summary. And as you can see, just from this example, it's very short. So it's a few screenshots and 1, 2, 3 paragraphs. It takes literally a minute to read. And then below this it's massive. You can see the scroll bar here. It's really tiny scroll bar. It's because what they're doing with this AI newsletter is they're aggregating all of the AI chatter from Twitter. They're doing it from Discord. They're doing it from Reddit. They're doing it from all these different sources that they see as high fidelity when it comes to understanding what's happening in the AI space every day. So like I said, I don't read everything. I literally just read the top piece. And that's it. So, and some of these are empty. So it says nothing much happened today. So they basically skip that section. But when things do happen, they have that summary section where there's just a few paragraphs. So this is one I'd recommend checking out just to see what's happening every day. And it literally just takes you 30 seconds. All right. Next is Simon Wilson's newsletter. So this one I perceive as almost like a diary. So I think he publishes probably once or maybe twice a week. And again, I don't read everything. So I probably read on average 15% of what's here. Maybe 50% if it's a really good piece, but that's probably like 1 in 10. And with this, what I'm looking for is anything that has been recently released, because he'll usually publish something a few hours or a day after a new model is released. And his take is usually interesting because he tests it against a series of tests that he runs consistently to check the model's ability to do useful tasks, not just basic benchmarks, but useful tasks that are useful for people. And also has pretty good insight onto different types of features associated to the models as well, because he plays with them for at least 3 to 6 hours before publishing something, and he has some pretty novel insights. So this is another good one. And then the last one here is Eugene. So these are deeper dive newsletters. So again, I probably read 2 out of 10 of these, and those two I find usually pretty useful because he writes lengthy ones, and he'll choose a specific topic, and he publishes maybe once every 2 to 3 weeks. And it could be on RAG, it could be on evals for evaluation, it could be on a variety of other tasks or points, even prompting. And if they're interesting, I'll then read it because they're longer, so I don't want to waste time on it. But sometimes if it's just about research or something like that, I'm usually not going to spend too much time on it. And then for Discord, we have skimming. And this is the latent space Discord. And the specific channel in this Discord that I find extremely useful is the AI general news and chat. Reason being is that I try to avoid X and basically social media at all costs. I don't really use social media much. And one thing I do try to avoid is X. And reason being is that it just gets a little hairy and crazy there. And the good thing about this channel is it aggregates all of the interesting AI news that's happening on X and places it just in this channel. So I don't have to scroll through X to find interesting stuff. Everybody that's a part of this community, they collectively work as a community to add this information into this channel, and it's really high fidelity and high signal. And that's basically what I check instead of X. So I check this probably once every 3 days, and I'll maybe spend 20 minutes catching up on what I've missed. And if there's anything that I did miss and I don't want to read it now, I'll actually add it to this little thing down here. So this is actually what I was going to call it later, but I'll call it out now, is Pocket. So there's a million different apps that do this, but think of it as bookmarks. So if I find something on X that I'm interested in and I want to read on it later, I'll either get the link from the tweet that's probably referencing a blog or a research paper or something else, and I'll add that to Pocket. So I can then come back later for my reading time, which I have usually a reading time on a daily basis or like every other day. I'll read it then, but I won't read it when it's not necessarily time to. So again, this is a really great channel. I recommend subscribing to the Discord just to check this channel. And then 2 people I wanted to call out on X that I thought were pretty good for 2 reasons. One is this individual here that is great at vibe coding. So he provides a lot of interesting, unique tips that I don't really see elsewhere. And then this other individual here is good at AI news, and not just AI news, but they tend to, again, have a great take and an interesting take that isn't just regurgitating the information, but has a unique spin on it, a unique insight that others don't. So those are the items that I consume. So that is my AI information diet. And like I said, it's minimal consumption. I've cut out 80%. So what you're seeing here is the 20%. I used to consume all other types of stuff, like, probably 20 other newsletters and a bunch of other areas, but I've cut it all down just to the areas that I see are the most important and have the highest utility for the thing I'm optimizing for, which is utilitarian perspective on AI. And then lastly, I want to give some tips on my consumption. So things that I do, you might already know, but I just wanted to provide it just in case. So like I said, most of the stuff I consume is via audio. And I'll do some reading, but most of it is through audio. So when I go on walks, when I work out, when I'm cooking, when I'm cleaning, also when I'm driving, all types of things. I'm always consuming podcasts or audio formats of videos to fill in that quote unquote dead time of doing life admin. So things that you have to do every day, but listening and consuming information that I feel like is high fidelity so I can keep up with what's going on. In addition to this, I also do read, and when I read, it's usually either in bed before I go to sleep. I'll read for a bit on the longer blog pieces or when stretching. So sometimes I'll stretch throughout the day, and the reason I read and stretch, and that's not how you spell stretch. Let me show you how to spell stretch. We do it like this, I think. Let's test it. Stretch. Stretch. All right. So as you can see, I'm basically a genius. Basically. And so yeah, I'll read doing these 2 tasks, and that helps. The reason this is actually a fun fact. I don't know if you knew this, but when stretching, it for some reason, at least for me, it kind of wakes you up. in a sense, because your like your muscles are in slight pain, so you're slightly alert. And by doing that, you can, at least for me, I can consume information more effectively. So little hack there. So next is playback speed. So anytime I'm listening to stuff, I've worked my way up to probably around 2x when I'm consuming information. Playback speed. So how fast is the audio coming back to me? I recommend, if you want to listen to things at a faster rate, some people think that this is disgusting and you should never do it. But if you're interested, you can start with 1.25x and then gradually increment your way up to a point where you can consume. And I don't recommend getting to 2x or higher. Honestly, I'm probably around 1.75. Reason being is that if it's good information and I want to consume it, you should likely probably slow it down so you understand exactly what's being said. And reason being, and asking the question here is like, why do I do this? Why do I speed up things in playback? Well, when people speak, as per this video, the information density here is quite low. What do I mean by that? Well, when you're reading something from ChatGPT, or even when you're talking to AI, even the current AIs today, it's sometimes hard to follow what they're saying because what they're saying is so dense with information, it's hard to follow everything that's being stated. But when a human communicates with another human, we have a lot of dead time between it. So sometimes it's ums, ahs, all that stuff. Or maybe it's telling a story that then makes a point. Or maybe it's a back and forth between two individuals where they're kind of getting ready to talk about the interesting thing, but they're not necessarily there yet. So there's a lot of open space and the information density is low. So to get past that point of the low information density and getting to the point that actually matters, you can speed through that stuff of the back and forth and chatter, and you can pick up the important pieces as you go. The next thing here is sampling first. So what do I mean by this? If there's a long podcast that's, say, 3 hours, because there's some of these are like the Dwarkesh Patel and a few other of these podcasts, they can be quite lengthy. And with those, it's time consuming to listen to the entire thing. So sometimes, instead of listening to the entire thing, what I'll do is I'll get the transcript from the podcast. And once I've gotten the transcript from the podcast, I'll either throw this into O3 or I'll throw this into 2.5 Pro, depending on the length of the file. So if it's too long, I'll throw it into 2.5 Pro. If it'll fit, I'll throw it into O3. Oftentimes it fits in O3, so it's fine, but sometimes it's pretty beastie. And what I'll do is I'll ask for the cliff notes. And specifically, I'll say, pull out the most compelling discussion points inside of this conversation and tell me exactly why they're novel associated to other things that have been discussed around this topic. If they are. If they're not, just tell me it's normal. And they'll give it somewhat of a rating on the, I would say, signal to noise ratio point. And I'll then consume that information if I want to. If not, I'll toss it aside. So in the sampling here, so say I have 5 that I run through the sample, maybe 3 to 2. So 2 to 3 I'll listen to out of the 5. I think that's a pretty useful tactic to ensure that you're not listening to all the really long podcasts if they're not necessarily useful or relevant for what you're interested in. I appreciate you listening to this. I hope you found it entertaining, educational, all that stuff. So if you did, reshare it with your friends. And if you'd like to work with me, I have a company called Gradient Labs, where we help organizations implement AI internally to increase productivity, save money and time, and even sometimes generate revenue. So if that's interesting to you, below is a link for a free discovery call so you can chat with me to see if there's a good fit. With that being said, Internet, I'll see you next time.